Vamos. A few more seconds. Okay. Okay, here we go. While I was learning and understanding this information, which began in 1971, basically from 1971 until about roughly 1996 or 1997, somewhere around in there, I had an experience long about that time that I couldn't understand. I was meditating in my Merkaba, and I was spending a long time meditating in the Merkaba, an hour or more, and everything was sort of normal, when suddenly my body appeared inside of a cave. And it was a rather small cave. It was probably only as big as just this little side over here. And it was really real. It was just as real as this. And I couldn't figure out, I was having the experience, and then it went away after a while. And then it happened again, and then again, and then it kept happening. I kept going back to this same place. And I had no idea what this was. As this began to happen, I had a friend, Pete Carroll, who was the head coach for a football team, the New York Jets. And he kept wanting me to get in contact with this woman. He said, you got to meet this lady. She's very unusual. And I kept going, well, yeah, but I'm really busy. I don't have time to do this. And so I kept putting them off because I was so busy. Finally, after a few months, he says, look, you've got to do this. And so I'm going to take your phone number and give it to her so she can call you. And I said, okay. And she called me, and her name was Marianne Shinfield. This woman was an anomaly. She was very, very unusual. She was completely blind, but she could see. She had no eyes, but she could watch television and read books. She could walk around, down the steps, do anything. You would never know in a million years that she was blind. And I started talking to her, and she was not only unusual in that way, but she was unusual in lots of other ways, because she was able to see not only the outer world, but she could see psychically in ways that were extraordinary. She told me how NASA found out that she was blind but could see, and so they asked to do experiments with her. And I wouldn't have done it. I would have said, nope, sorry. But she did, and basically now she belongs to NASA. They're with her all the time and constantly doing experiments. But one of them was when, in the very beginning, they asked her, okay, well, you can see, but what's going on in there? And she says, well, it's hard to explain, but I'm floating through space. And they said, what do you mean you're floating through space? And she says, well, I'm confined to the solar system, but I can move anywhere in the solar system, and that's what I'm always doing, though my body is on Earth. And I think NASA probably said, sure, because they made a test. And they said, okay, if you're really floating through space, then go along this particular satellite we have up there and read a number off of it. that's on the satellite, and we'll believe you. So she did. She read the number off the satellite, and of course, every flag that NASA had went up, and they started using her. And they started having her go to different planets and look around and to all kinds of things, and they began to realize that what she was seeing was just like being there. She was real. At the time that I met her was when those 21 fragments of a planet of rock came through asteroids, and they were the ones that went around the sun and came back and went and slammed into the surface of Jupiter. You guys remember that? That was 96 or something like that. I don't remember when it was. And she was working with NASA at the time. She was going up to each one of those fragments, right up to them, and looking at them and describing them to NASA. So I'm talking to this lady on the phone, and I ended up talking to her for 4 months, and for about once a week for about 2 hours. And it was fascinating. It was absolutely. I've never met anyone like her. I've met people since then, but this was the first one I've ever met. And after a few times of being with her, she said to me, "Would you like to see through my eyes, the ones she doesn't have?" And of course I said yes. And she said, "Okay, well then lay down on a bed and make everything dark." So my wife sealed all the blinds off. It was a new moon, so it was dark out anyway, and turned off all the lights, and I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face. And then she had me prop the telephone up on a pillow so that I could completely relax while I was doing it. And then it took a while. It took maybe 10 minutes of her saying, "Do you see yet? Do you see yet?" I'm going, "No, I don't see anything." When suddenly, just like a light switch coming on, this phenomena took place. Sitting in front of me, maybe only this far in front of me, was a television screen or a computer monitor, whatever you want to call it, but it was like in that shape. It was about that big. And when you look, but it was really more like a window, because when you looked through it, it was just like looking outside, only instead of looking outside, I saw stars. It was just the same stars I see up here, but I could look through and see the stars. And around this television screen were little tiny TV screens that were about 2 inches by 3 inches. And they were mounted all around the outer edge of the screen. And they had images that were moving on them very, very fast. I mean, they were just going flip, 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 flip. About as you could recognize them, but as they were moving as fast as you could possibly recognize and still see what they were. And she drew my attention to the top right-hand one up here. She says, "Look at that one." I'm looking at it, and there were images of real pictures of like trees or animals or chairs or things mixed in with geometrical images. They were shuffled together, moving really fast. And she said, "That window tells me what's around my body on Earth. So I can look at that and watch television or read a book or walk around or open a refrigerator because I know what's around my body." And she then told me the window on the bottom left side. She only told me 2 windows out of all these windows. And this one over here, she says, "This is how I talk to my brothers and sisters." Well, there were ETs on this thing, and so what she was talking about is other ET races she could communicate through here. And let me make a long story short. Basically, I had a long experience with her. It was about 2 hours long, and I was looking through her eyes. And we went down, we looked at the comets, and we saw all these different things happen. And then after that, she only did this one time. And then after that, we communicated in images and mixed in with geometrical images. That was the whole communication. It was a kind of a strange thing talking to somebody. She'd say, "Okay, icosahedron, and now a tree," and things like this. And she'd make me draw them down. And somehow I just knew what she was talking about on really deep levels this way. And then after 4 months, it ended. We both agreed that we were done with whatever we were doing. She left. I've never seen her since. But this phenomena of seeing the center screen with these little screens around it, I've got a lot of very unusual experiences. I don't know how I got them, but I've got them. And I've got this little file I call my weird file. And I put these kind of things away. I don't discount them or anything, but I just wait to see if they'll just connect with something else on some other level, because I couldn't tie what she was doing into anything else that I knew. Several years went by, maybe 3-4 years went by, and I was here in Mexico giving a workshop. I think it was an Earth Sky workshop, which is an advanced level of the Flower of Life. And I was talking about another phenomenon that was going on in China. In 1974, the Chinese government discovered this young Chinese boy, I think he was about 10 or 12 years old, who could see with his ears. He could see with his ears just as well as you could see with your eyes. They could seal his eyes off. They could duct tape them off. And he could still see perfectly just by turning his ears around and seeing. Well, if it was only one kid, then that would be kind of like Marianne Shinfield. It would just be one person. But they then found another one. And then another one, then another one. And then they started finding ones that could see with different parts of their bodies. One could see with his ears, one could see with the tip of his nose, one could see with his mouth, at the tip of his tongue. Others could see with their armpits. Some could see with their feet or their hands. Some could see with their hair. I think those are all the different parts that they could see with. And so they would choose different ones. And some could see with more than one part. Some could see with 2 or 3 different areas of their body at once. Sounds outrageous, but this phenomena is not. It's absolutely scientifically documented on every level of science within our world. It's now been documented through Nature Journal, which is one of the most prestigious journals in the world, as well as Science News and Omni Magazine, and on and on and on, that have they don't understand it, but they have documented that it's fact and it's true. They've now found 100,000 children that can do this. It's not just 2 or 3, and they're still showing up in mass now, more and more and more. That was about 8 years ago. They were at 100,000. Now it's just climbing right off the scale, and so far, nobody's been able to figure out what the heck it means or why they can do that. Omni Magazine was now first, from 1974 until 1984, the Chinese government and the scientific community there discounted it completely and said it was fake. In fact, they even made newspapers dedicated only to the propaganda of letting the Chinese population believe that this was a fake. Until 1984, that's when they reached 100,000, was in 1984. And then there just became so many of these kids everywhere that were doing it that they finally gave in and realized that it was true. And that's when the rest of the world began to realize it was true. And then they, instead of denying it, they began to make schools to collect them, to begin to study them. And then once they collected them up, they began to find out that these kids could not just see without their eyes. They can do anything they thought of. They could just think of something and just do it, even if it broke all the laws of physics in ways that we can't even understand. They had one kid who was able to put, and this is what, under scientific scrutiny, the scientists would put a table out here, And the kid had to stand across the room, not near it. The scientist would take a bottle of pills that was sealed and put it in the middle. And then they were to put an object off to the side, like a coin or a marble or something. And then this little kid, who's like 6 years old, would come over here and go, okay, now. And all the pills would go right through the glass without breaking it and stack up on the table. And then the object would lift up in the air, float over to the bottle, and go right into the sealed bottle, and it's totally sealed. One kid did it, then another, then another, and then another, then 100, then 1,000, and finally 5,000 Chinese kids were able to duplicate that. It's all been documented with science. And then it started to get more and more outrageous. Then this little girl said, oh, I can do another one. She was 6 years old. And she made an audience come together of about 1,000 people. And as they walked in, she gave them a rosebud, a tight rosebud. Small, tight little rosebud. And they didn't know why they were getting these. And they all sat down. And she came on stage and said, okay, hold the rosebud up. And everybody held the rosebud up. And she said, okay, now. And all the rosebuds opened up. Can't be a trick. How did she do that? And then it just kept going, and it kept getting more and more outrageous. I mean, to things that these kids began to do things on the same level that Jesus was doing things. Literally. They have scientifically documented 2 of these children walking right through a solid wall. They're obviously breaking all the laws of physics that we know, but they're doing it, and we can't seem to do anything about it. They're just doing it. Omni magazine was sent there in late 1984 to check it out, see if it was real. And they were given 100 or so of these kids. These kids are all from about 6 years old to about 14 years old. And Omni said in the article, and you can read everything I'm about to tell you, it was in January 1985 when Omni made this article, so you can just go on the website and get it and read it, that they assumed that the Chinese government was just making a trick or something. And so they made up their own ideas of how they could prove it or test it. And one of the tests was they took a big stack of Chinese books, and they got the children there in a row, in a room. And they just assumed that they had hidden cameras or things like that. So they just pulled a book out at random, flipped open a random page, and before anybody could see it, just ripped it out, crumpled it up, and stuck it under their arm, then walked over to the kids and put it under their arm while it's still in their hand and no one can see it, put their arm down. Every one of these kids could read that page, both sides of it, perfectly. Over and over and over, 100% accurate, not even with a tiny error or once. And they kept making all these kinds of tests going, well, what is this, I mean, this is not normal psychic ability. This is, usually most psychics are like 60% right or 80% right. They were 100% right every time, whatever they did. So anyway, I was in Mexico giving a workshop here, and I was talking about these kids in China, and what was written up about them. And a young lady, 18 years old, a Mexican girl from Mexico City, she goes, "Oh, I can do that stuff." And we go, "You can?" She goes, "Oh yeah, I do it all the time. I've been doing it for years." She says, "Would you like me to show you?" And we go, I'm going to say no, Yeah, of course. So she came up, and her name was Inga. She was dressed in all white. She was beautiful. And she came up, and I says, "Okay, it's all yours. Here's the stage." And so she sat down. She says, "Okay, first of all, are there anybody in here that's skeptical that doesn't believe that I can see without my eyes?" And everybody sat there. And finally, 2 young men stood up and said, "Oh, come on. You can't see without your eyes." And she goes, "Well, would you 2 come up here then?" And she sat them down and says, "Here's what I'm going to do." And she took tissue paper and put it in their eyes and then had this long gold scarf. And wrapped the scarf around and around and around their eyes with a tissue paper so nothing would go out until she said, "Now, can you see?" And the guy goes, "No, I can't see a thing." Okay. And she did it to the other guy. He says, "Can you see?" And he goes, "No, I can't see a thing." She says, "Okay, do it to me." So they put the tissue paper into the eyes and wrap this thing around and make sure it's there. She says, "Are you satisfied that I can't see?" They go, "Yeah, I don't think you can see." And he says, "Okay." So they went back and sat down. And she says, and I didn't know what she was going to do. I had no idea. And she says, "Would somebody give me a photograph?" And so a woman just reached in her purse and pulled out a photograph and handed it to her. It was handed to her upside down. She immediately turned it right side up, and her finger went like this. And so then she describes the photograph as though she's just looking at it perfectly. It was a couch sitting in a living room with 4 people on the couch with just a photograph. I mean, a painting behind the couch, and it was not just an ordinary photograph. And so she describes it in detail: the color, the people. There were 3 females and a male, like that. And she says, and I thought that was it. I thought that was it. And I started to reach for the photograph, and she said, "Is there anything you'd like to know about this photograph?" And the lady says, "Well, what do you mean?" She says, "I can tell you anything. I can tell you who took the photograph, what their name is and their phone number is, and what they were thinking at the time, if you want. I can walk through your house. I can tell you where your house is. I can give you your name and address and phone number. I can tell you all the names of the people on the couch, or anything you want. What do you want?" She goes, "You can?" She goes, "Okay. Go to the right of the picture and tell me what's there." And there was nothing there. You couldn't see anything. And she goes, "Well, you got a hallway right there, and the first door on the left is your bedroom." She went in and described her bedroom in detail, the colors, where the bed was, even went over to her nightstand and told her what was sitting on the nightstand. Then she went out across the door into the next one, which was into her bathroom, and described the bathroom exactly, the colors, the size, the shape, and what it was, and everything. And the woman says, "That's enough." She says, "That's absolutely correct." And so she handed her back, and she says, "Is there anybody else has a photograph?" Well, one of these guys jumps up and says, "Come on, you rigged this before. You know this lady. She gave you the thing." He says, "Let me give you something of mine." She goes, "Okay." So he reaches in his wallet and gives her his driver's license. But he turns it upside down and backwards when he hands it to her. She immediately turns it right side up and frontwards. And her little finger goes like this. She goes, "It's your driver's license." And she reads off the numbers and addresses and all the stuff on there like that. And he goes, "I don't know how you're doing it, but you're faking this somehow." He says, You are not convincing me. Tell me something that only I know. That only I know. No one else knows." And this little smile comes on her face. She goes, "Okay." And he was there with her girlfriend. She was sitting next to her, but he was standing up here now. And he goes, "You have 2 girlfriends." and their names are da-da-da-da-da-da, which was one of them that was here. And they don't know about each other. And he starts to go on further, and she's up straight in her chair, and he grabs the license plate out of her, or the thing out of her, and she goes, "That's enough," and walks down and sits down, and she's, we didn't hear from him ever again. And then other photographs were handed to her by lots of people. Lots and lots of people. And she could go into those photographs and just tell you everything. In fact, there isn't anything that she couldn't tell you. Anything you can think of. She could give you the birth date. She could tell you where you were born. She could even tell you the day you're going to die, down to the minute and where and how. She could tell you anything in the future. Tell you anything. As outrageous as it seems, that audience was pretty shocked, I'm sure. Well, later, I brought her to my house. We've become very good friends, and along with her mother, Ema. And I, for 3 days, I performed all kinds of experiments. And some experiments that were, you just couldn't fake, not in a million years. I had a whole bunch of bottles of water that we were analyzing. And they were just lettered A, B, C, D, like that. And they all looked the same, except in them were different chemical makeups. Well, she was able to hold the bottle just for a second and tell me exactly what was in the water. Some of those bottles of water, I knew what it was, so she could have been getting it from my mind. But there were about half of them I had no idea, and some guy in some lab somewhere in the world knew where it was, but she still nailed every single one of them right. And I kept going on all kinds of things, and it didn't matter what I did. She was 100% perfect on everything. And this was fascinating. Then finally, after a couple of days, I was sitting here, and we were doing a break. She was just hanging out on the couch, and I was hanging out on the couch. And we were breaking, we're just talking. And I said, Inga, I was curious. I said, what do you see when you close your eyes and you're blindfolded? What do you see inside? What happened? What's going on in there? And she said, oh, it's not important. And I said, well, yeah, it is. I'm curious. Just try to tell me what's going on inside there, in your head. And she didn't want to tell me, and I had to keep pushing it. And finally, like about 10 minutes of pushing her, she says, well, it's weird. That's why I don't want to tell you. It looks like a little computer screen inside there with these little tiny computer screens around the outside. I almost fell off the couch. It was the last thing in the world I thought she was going to tell me. I mean, here it was, exactly the same as Marianne Shinfield. I said, I know what that is. She goes, I know you know what that is. She says, the reason I came to your workshop was because I saw your poster, and when I saw the poster, I knew you were connected to this, and that's why I wanted to connect with you. And I said, oh, okay. And so when she left, after she left, then I'm thinking, well, do all the kids in China also see this inner screen? So there was a book written about these kids in China called China's Super Psychics. And it was written by a man named Paul Dong. So I found out where he was, and he was in California. He was 72 years old, and I called him up. Really nice guy. We talked for about 2 hours, and it was really, I got lots of good information. But somewhere in that conversation, I said to him, Paul, you've been studying these kids for 15 years or so. What do they see inside their head? And he went through the same thing. He didn't want to tell me. And finally he says, well, I don't really know. I've never experienced it, but a lot of these kids tell us they see some kind of computer screen or television screen inside their head. And I said, they have these little windows around the outside. And he goes, I don't know anything about that. All they say is it's some kind of screen that they see inside their head. And I'm going, and so now all of my little wheels in my head are going, wow, I know what this is. And it's all tied to darkness. They go in and they seal their eyes off, just like Marianne Shinfield, who was blind. They don't want any light. Not any. They don't want one photon getting in there if they can. They want it completely dark. And this is a huge key in the new consciousness that's unfolding. I found out from her that there were 2 schools here in Mexico City that teach this, and that she had over 1,000 friends that could do this in Mexico City. Other Mexican kids that were able to see with their hands or their feet or other levels and could know anything about what they're looking at. Then I found out that there were 3 schools in Russia, and I was able to do research when I was in Russia around all of this, and they've known about it for a long time. They're far more advanced in Russia over Mexico or China. They've got kids there that can do things that these kids have never thought about. That's the whole thing. One kid has to think of something, and then once they think of something, then all the other kids says, "Oh, I can do that," and they can do the same thing. It's just like they just have to imagine something, and then they're there. They're there. The kids in Russia can just pick up a book, hold it for a second, and they got the book, not only on their inner screen like a computer where they can scroll down and look at it, but they instantaneously know everything that author knows about that subject. They know it all. Whatever he knew, or she knew, they know. And lots and lots and lots. I mean, I'm just touching on some of the subjects of what they've done. The Chinese are even able to change DNA molecules just by looking at them. And through scientific study where they're looking at the molecule, and the kids just look at it, and they can actually alter the codons and everything inside that, which implies awesome possibilities of evolution. So at any rate, to make a long story short again, these kids are beginning to pop up everywhere, and it's all tied to an ability to see in darkness rather than in light. With a lot of research and a lot of study, since I know this is true because I had the experience, it's not like I'm guessing. I know, I understand what they're doing. I've been doing a lot of research around this. Recently, I took a group through the Four Corners area of the United States, doing ceremony with the Anasazi Indians. And when I was in the Navajo Nation, we were going into something called Antelope Canyon. And it belongs to the Navajo Nation, and it's one of the most remarkable places I've ever been in my life. But when we were to get there, the only way they'll do it is they make you get out of the car, and they drive you there. They won't let you go there. And this Navajo shaman, he was maybe 35, 40 years old, and his two grandmothers, who were in their 50s and 60s, well, probably 60s at least. They each drove a truck out to about 20 miles on this dirt road out to where we were. And so we got out there, and I had a group of about 55 people that we were going around with. And this man, Darwin was his name, he took us through the canyon to the other side. He got to the other side. He told us stories. He's looking at us and going through this whole thing. He took us back. He sang us peyote songs, did all this thing for us. We got back to the other side, and he's out on the other side, and he's showing us the natural snake pattern on the outside of this, leading into this canyon. And he's describing all the details in it, and he's telling us, look here and here. And as he's doing that, I'm standing here next to his grandmother, and she goes, "It's really amazing, isn't it?" I go, "What?" I mean, he's doing all these things, and he's absolutely blind. He can't see anything. I go, "You mean he drove me out here in the truck?" And he's blind. He goes, "Yep." So I got back in the truck with this guy, and he drove me out there. He's completely blind. He's driving down this road like crazy, And he's another one of them. They're all over the place. In Russia, they can train any blind person to do this. They can take a blind person and teach them how to see. It takes about 2 years of training, unless you're under 14, and they can do it in about 2 weeks. But there's a whole other world opening up here. Something extraordinary is occurring in the world. And Jimmy Twyman's finding them in Bulgaria. They're popping up everywhere now. And these are called the super psychic children. These are not the indigo kids. The indigo kids are connected to wherever there are lots of computers. It's a whole another phenomenon that's occurring at the same time while this other one is occurring. And you can almost count how many computers there are per capita and tell how many indigos are inside of there. And they have another thing happening. They can't do this kind of stuff with their hands and feet and everything. So what's it all about? And what is this special thing that they are bringing to this world, and why are they doing it? Well, this is my opinion, and you may come up to another one. But what I've learned is that there is a place inside of your heart. It was known in ancient times. It's been almost completely forgotten now. But there is a sacred space inside of your heart that if spirit learns how to leave the mind, and I mean absolutely, literally, go out of the head and travel through the body and go into the heart and then find this sacred opening and go inside that sacred opening and then find another tiny sacred space inside that heart, that God resides there. God is everywhere, but boy is God there. And when you enter into that space, you and God become one. And all things are possible. And all knowledge is present there. You can know anything. And you can see out into the outer world from that space. You can connect back to it even though you are inside of your heart in darkness. You can connect back into this outer world out here and know anything, past, present, or future. What it means, ultimately, I can only tell you what I think it means. Because we're going to all have to live this. We're all going to go through this. We're all going to remember this at one point in this. It's tied to the creation itself. When someone prays to God for something, when they sit down and in all honesty pray, perhaps for their wife or mother or son or daughter to be healed of something, or themselves, or something else, when they go in and they sincerely pray, most of the time nothing happens. Zero. But sometimes something does happen. Sometimes a miracle occurs. And people very often don't know why. It just, you have 10 people praying, nothing happens, and one of them, a miracle occurs. Well, the science of miracles was written down, I don't know how long ago it was over 2,500 years ago, however old the Dead Sea Scrolls were. They found another scroll near the Dead Sea Scrolls that Greg Braden has written into a book called The Isaiah Effect, and the exact details of how you create a miracle were done there. You have to include your mind, your heart, and your body all at the same time. If you leave out any one of those pieces, nothing happens. But what Greg has found, we've sat and talked about this for a long time, and we're all coming to the same conclusion, the people that work in this, is that, yeah, you can create miracles from the mind. You can do it. You can do things that are just extraordinary from the mind. Psychic abilities, I've worked with the Monroe Institute. I've worked with the Berkeley Psychic Institute. I've done and seen things that most people would never believe, but I've seen it. But nevertheless, it's still coming from the mind. But the mind has one big problem. The mind is a polarized instrument that is polarized left and right. It's polarized again with the front and back lobes. Everything in it, as it looks out into this one reality, sees everything as polarized. And anything it creates through this mind always creates a polarized reality. And so if you're praying for world peace, you're going to get world peace, but you're also going to get world war. If you're what you pray for, if you're in the mind when you do it, you're going to get the sides of the coin, both the light and the dark of that thing. And you can't help it because the instrument that you're doing it through is polarized. But if you learn how to leave the mind and go into the sacred place in the heart, you can create from there. The heart doesn't know polarization. It only knows oneness and unity. It cares about all levels of life and doesn't see any particular level of life doesn't have any thought patterns or logic in it at all. It uses the dream process. And it uses feelings and emotions. It's feminine rather than masculine. And it doesn't, and because it isn't using logic, things don't have to get from A to B logically. Psychic phenomena, you can actually track all psychic phenomena and explain it. The military's been working with that for years, both Russian and Chinese and the United States that I know of for sure. You can track every psychic phenomena back exactly. You could explain it on how it took place. But you can't explain the creation patterns that happen from the heart. If you do the psychic patterns from the mind, it will appear as a coincidence. But if you do if you do it from the heart, it appears out of nowhere. If you're trying to get an apple in your hand and you're doing it psychically, there's going to be some logical pattern where someone was doing it. I used to always I knew all this and I was trying to experiment with it before I knew about the heart. So I was always trying to manifest an orange. I used to sit for hours. There's an orange in my hand. I could see it. I could feel it. Trying to make this orange happen in my hand. And it never would happen. But I kept believing in it and I kept trying it because I knew the possibilities of what it was doing it. And then one day I was in a meditation group with about 6 or 7 people, and we were all sitting there meditating. And I was meditating for about an hour. And then I said, I'm going to try this orange thing. Nobody knew I was doing it but me. And so I held my little hand out here like that, and I said, there's an orange in my hand. I could feel it. I'm thinking about it. I'm sitting there, and somebody in the room went in the other room, came in there, and dropped an orange in my hand. The impact was incredible. I just went, whoa, it's there. And she says, you gave me the orange? And there was a logical sequence. I did it. I actually did it. But it was a logical sequence. But if you were in your heart and did that same thing, it would actually appear out of nothing. There doesn't have to be any logic to it. There doesn't have to be any nothing. It just can happen without any science behind it or anything else like that. It's pure feminine creativity. This is where we're going, hopefully, that we can get out of our heads, out of our minds, into our hearts, where our hearts can control our minds rather than our minds controlling our hearts. We don't have any wisdom from our heart, from our minds. We can make incredible science. We can do amazing logical things. But we have no wisdom, and we're killing our planet with this brilliant science that we're doing that's coming from our mind. But we could do the same science and the same things from within our heart. Wouldn't do any harm to anybody anywhere at all. So there is a way, and I can't explain it now, but there is a way where your heart can gain control of the mind. And that's what this workshop that we're about to go into is. I mean, all I can do is give an introduction right now. I can't take you down into that place. It takes 3 days to get there. Sorry, I can't do it. I know of. But just with what I'm talking about, you've seen all this logical stuff. You've seen the stuff of the mind. The Merkaba is of the mind also. But the toroidal fields, I'll just tell you the secret, the toroidal fields of the Merkaba, of the mind, and the toroidal fields of the heart. Yes, the heart has toroidal fields. Stanford University has scientifically proven this. They found that the most powerful electromagnetic field that's emitted from the human body does not come from the mind, but comes from the heart. And it's big. It's an electromagnetic field that extends 8 to 10 feet out from around the body, and it's in the shape of a torus. Again, that donut shape. And the axis runs down right through the heart, which happens to run exactly through the sacred space, because that's the generator of it. And so you have the axis of the Merkaba right over here. At one point in the development, the axis of the heart and the axis of the Merkaba link, and the Merkaba fields synchronize. And this phenomena takes place, which is the next level. It's the second level of the Merkaba. And this is what we're in the process of learning how to remember what this is about. Finally, there will be a third level that's coming, that it may not be me, it might be you, it might be someone in the world that will understand it. But once the heart links with the mind and gains control of the mind, then the sexual energy of the body takes on a whole new purpose and meaning. What's associated with creativity, the creation? How is a new human being born? It's through conception, and it's through sexual energy that takes place. When sexual energy is used in a very pure way, used through the heart patterns and through the mind of the Merkaba, true creation can actually take place. Anything's possible at that point. And this is where we're leading to. And this is how we're going to get out of these problems that we've got, that we have created in our mind. I wish I could go deeper into all of this, but I really can't without a lot more training that I could take you through. But it's all I can do right now. Now, there is one thing, and I've been asked to do this. One of the problems of people being able to get into the heart, no matter how much study you do or how much work you do, what I've discovered is that some people can't get in there because they have emotional trauma in their heart. They've been rejected by a mate, or they've had a divorce, or something's happened that has hurt so bad that they've sealed it. And when they go into their heart, they feel that pain, and they go back out and they go, I can't go in there, it hurts. And so in many different shades of that same experience, for one reason or another, they can't get in there. And the only way that we can get them in there is through healing the emotional heart of their heart space. And so we've developed a system in the school to do that, but it's not real good. Ideally, you actually have therapy. You go through therapy to solve the emotional problems before you begin to do this heart work. This would be the most perfect thing to do. And there are many really good people out there in the world. We're very fortunate now because they're all over. The science has been developed very high. My wife is also involved in this, and she has a system that's 4,000 years old that came from the original people who first wrote about the Merkaba. She's trained as a psychologist from Harvard and all this stuff, but she just threw that out. That was useless for what she learned, and studied from the people who had learned this. They were all a 96-year-old lady in Jerusalem that held this pattern. And so there is ways we're using images that are inside the body to solve these problems completely, so that you can go into the heart just like that. And so if this is something that you think you may be involved in, or any other aspect of spiritual work, no matter what it is or what level it is that you're working in, the emotional body must be healed first. They knew this in Egypt, and they knew it in Greece, they knew it all over. And but anyway, my wife will be here. When is it? In September? September 7th. Okay, so approximately that time. And if you're interested in her helping you in that way, Conchita can help you. You can find other ways. That's not the only. My wife's not the only way. There's lots of other people out there that can help you. But without that emotional balance, you can't do this properly. It won't work. So this is what the work is. This is what the Flower of Life is involved in, these three levels. The first one is the Merkaba. The second one has to do with the heart and the heart spaces and what's involved in that. And finally, the work with the sexual energy and how to work with all of that. And though the sexual programs will probably not be out there for at least a year or two. So that's it. Now, if there's any questions, I'll do what I can to answer them. If you have a question, if you could come up here to this microphone and ask the question, I'll do it. If you feel to go now, you can. It's up to you. You don't have to do this. But if you want to watch, or if there's something else that you want to follow through there, I'll stay here for another half hour or so.
Sí, vamos a dedicar algún momento para preguntas. Las personas que deseen hacer preguntas, si se acercan aquí y hacen una fila, por favor, y les vamos dando el micrófono. Vamos a dedicar un poco de tiempo, no demasiado, porque no podemos estarnos toda la noche, pero lo que podamos. Es que nos emocionamos y luego aquí no nos vamos nunca. Si alguien quiere acercarse.
Yo quería saber un poco de los niños índigos.
The indigo children are, okay, if you look at the mind, it's divided into the left and the right side. The left side is male and logical. The right side is female and emotional. The planet, Earth, is divided in the same way. It's not a straight line, but there are areas of the Earth that are associated with the left brain and areas that are associated with the right brain. Like India and Tibet are in the right brain, and the United States and Germany are definitely in the left brain. And what's the psychic children that we have been talking about that can see with their hands and feet